On the Track is a monthly web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
In the 1930s, a remote farmhouse in Cashan's Gap on the Isle of Man became the focus of weird events. Following a poltergeist outbreak, a small strange creature appeared. The Irving family, who owned the house, heard the animal speak. It claimed to be a mongoose called Jeff, who had been born in India in 1852. Jeff haunted the family for almost a decade and became world famous. He was even mentioned in the British Parliament. Although the house at Cashan's Gap was demolished in 1971, Jeff remains a Fortean icon to this day.
Hello again, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's me, Barry Tadcaster, back again, and this is my old mate, Jeff the Talking Mongoose. I'm the eighth wonder of the world, me! Thou shalt never know what I am. I already know what you are, you're a talking mongoose. Oh, that's by the by. I was born in New Delhi in 1852. Hey! Well, you've aged quite well, ain't you, mate? Oh yes. Jeff, where have you been? I ain't seen you in a bit. You've not been in Vorry's knicker drawer again, have you? No, I refute that completely. I've not been in Vorry's knicker drawer. Well, where have you been then? I've been planning a green gauge summer.
I really like the old credits.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name's John Downs, and as regular viewers will know, each week I come before you to present a peculiar mixture of hard science, high strangeness, a teensy-weensy bit of magic and mayhem on occasion, and a certain amount of surreal dicking around. I consider myself to be a scientist, and I consider myself to be somebody whose research should be taken seriously. However, I don't consider myself to be somebody who needs to be taken seriously all the time, which is why I do what I do in the way that I do it. I'm basically an unashamed old hippie, and as Richard Bandler said once, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. And I'm still trying. Now I'm going to throw you all in at the deep end. What do you think of this? According to Swords Today, a website which I freely admit I'd never heard of before, this is a chimera cat suffering from something called genetic chimpanzee. Well, I've never heard of genetic chimpanzee, and I've looked it up and I can't find it anywhere. But before we go any further, I want to make something clear. In many ways, this weekly show is a direct descendant from the Weird Weekend, the conference which I promoted for 17 years, and which, if it hadn't been for my family issues, I would still be promoting now, and which quite possibly, after COVID is all said and done, I will be promoting again. But the whole concept of both the Weird Weekend and this show is that information flows both ways. This isn't me standing up on a pedestal telling you what's what and what's which. I learn just as much from you guys as you learn from me. So before we go on, just take that on board, because although I've never heard of a genetic chimpanzee, that doesn't mean to say that it doesn't exist. It just means to say that I've not heard of one. But this cat looks very much like something that I've always known as a halved or bilateral Gynandromorph. And they're fascinating creatures which can be found all across the animal kingdom, although they're probably best known as butterflies. A Gynandromorph is an organism that contains both male and female characteristics. The term comes from the Greek gyne, female, ana, male, and morph, form, and is probably most widely known in the field of entomology. Probably the most well-known gynandromorphic organisms on the planet are butterflies, wherein both types of body part can be distinguished physically due to sexual dimorphism. A gynandromorph can have bilateral asymmetry, one side female and one side male. Alternatively, the distribution of male and female tissue can be more haphazard. Bilateral gynandromorphy arises very early in development, typically when the organism has only between 8 and 64 cells. Later stages produce a more random pattern. I first read about the condition in a book called Living with Butterflies by Hugh Newman, a few weeks after I moved to North Devon 50 years ago this summer. My dear late mother always encouraged my brother and me to go to the travelling library whenever it came to the village, and on my very first visit to the travelling library I discovered this book, and my life has truly, in a very major way, not been the same since. Newman was a British entomologist, author and broadcaster. He wrote many popular books on insects, particularly butterflies and moths. With Peter Scott and James Fisher, he was a resident member of the team who presented a show called Nature Parliament on BBC Radio's Children's Hour in the 1950s. He ran a butterfly farm in Kent, which he inherited from his father, supplying, amongst others, Sir Winston Churchill, who bought many butterflies for the grounds of his house at Chartwell. Living with Butterflies is still one of my favourite books, and the chapters in which Newman described hunting for aberrations of various species of the lycaenids, or blues, still never fails to fascinate me. Bilateral gynandromorphs are not the only deviations from the genetic norm which Newman describes, and although the book has been out of print for decades, one can still buy it reasonably easily online, and it's a book that I cannot recommend enough for people interested in such things. Hugh Newman is largely forgotten these days, which is a great pity because all his books, at least the ones that I've managed to get hold of, are worth reading, and his book on British hawk moths, for example, stands head and shoulders above the others that have come since in the field. Although it's more usually found in invertebrates such as butterflies and moths, bilateral gynandromorphism can be found, and is quite regularly found, in vertebrates. Look at this bird, for example. It's a cardinal, a well-known bird from North America, which is so called because the male has bright scarlet feathers reminiscent of the robes of a high-ranking prelate of the Roman Catholic Church. In a sad example of the sexism of Mother Nature, which happens once in a time, the females are far less colourful, and here, when the bird is a bilateral gynandromorph, you can see that one side is bright red, the other side is a dull grey-brown colour. Which of course means that the left-hand side is female and the right-hand side is male. I knew about bilateral gynandromorph cardinals and various other species of bird, but I'd never heard of gynandromorph cats before. However, I typed it into Google, and look what came up. Lots of gynandromorph cats. More gynandromorph cats than you can shake a shitty stick at. And I don't know if there is actually a phrase in the English language which equates to the phrase in my mind's eye, but for hearing, But as I said that, I could hear my producer Louis shouting in my mind's ear,
John, you can't say shake a shitty stick at it. It will upset people and YouTube will penalise us in the algorithms.
algorithms, pfft, he's just making up words again. And generally behaving in the sort of psychotic manner he does every time we call him Computer Boy.
Don't call me Computer Boy!
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's quite probable that Apricot, the kitten in Nashville, Tennessee, and I think there has to be a song there. There's a binaural Gynandromorphs in Memphis. It may not be a Gynandromorph, but it looks that way to me. I called a cat geneticist to ask him what it means. He said, when you're investigating pussy like this, you first unzip its genes.
You can't say that, that's sexist. I'm going to call Louis.
The first step in DNA replication is to separate or unzip the two strands of the double helix. The enzyme in charge of this is called a helicase because it unwinds the helix. The point where the double helix is opened up and the DNA is copied is called a replication fork. That is what unzipping genes means. Anybody else who has a different interpretation of that just has a dirty mind. But yes, I think that it's very likely that this attractive little cat is a half Gynandromorph. But I don't know. I really don't know enough about the subject to be able to pronounce on it. So, is there anybody out there who knows more about feline genetics than me? Well, it wouldn't be difficult. So, if you have an opinion on the subject, please write it down in the comments. And also write in the comments, should I be allowed to say shaking a shitty stick on a family show like this? Or is my producer Louis right? Please let us know, especially if you're telling me that I'm in the right and giving me another metaphorical shitty stick with which I can beat my poor long-suffering producer. Something that is quite unusual about this episode is that it's all about stuff which came into my inbox in the past week. Look at this. Once again, this comes from my old friend Judy Jafar, and you'll remember we met her a few weeks ago. And once again, Judy, I do apologise for all the times that I used you as the butt of my stupid sense of humour whenever we were doing the quiz at the Weird Weekend. For those of you who weren't there, and I suspect that there's an awful lot of people watching this who were never there, I always made sure that Judy was the captain of one of the quiz teams, and I always then loaded the team with people who I knew would be completely and utterly useless, and then made sure that the other team was full of people with PhDs. The best time I think I ever did it, her teammates were a nephew of mine who was 6 and didn't stop giggling, and an emo guy from Finland who could hardly speak English. This is what I call true entertainment. But despite this, Judy and I have remained friends throughout the years, and this week she sent me this photograph of bones which were discovered when her son-in-law and a couple of builders were doing renovation work to a rockery at the end of her garden. I showed them to Carl Marshall, and he and I both agreed that they were a canid of some sort, either a dog or a fox, but we questioned where was the skull. Then we sent it to Lars Thomas, who agreed that it was impossible to tell whether it was the skeleton of a dog or a fox, but pointed out something that we'd completely missed, that there were 3 scapulae, 3 shoulder blades, and therefore the skeletons were of at least 2 different animals, and so there were at least 2 skulls missing. What do you think? I have no idea except the nasty ideas of ritual sacrifices, and I truly don't think that ritual sacrifices took place in a Victorian rockery within the past 150 years. It seems massively unlikely to me. So what happened to the skulls? Why were they buried? And if there's anybody out there who can give me any idea at all, even if it is true that there is some sort of weird satanic cult activity in Ealing that has been going back since the late Victorian years, then please let me know in the comments below, because this is the sort of investigation, the sort of mystery that fascinates the living bejesus out of me.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer and I are telling you, please remember to ring that notification bell. Otherwise you won't be told when we've got another show. Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, just about at the end of the show once more. And I want to say a big thank you, first of all, to you guys for watching. I really, really appreciate this. Second of all, to our Patreon supporters. Hello guys, again, I really appreciate all that you do for us. And to the people without whom this show would not have been made, this episode was particularly made with 3 people, Carl, Louis and Graham. Graham is the guy who keeps me going. If it wasn't for him, I'd probably end up having to go into a care home, and I don't think I'd enjoy that very much. And Louis is my long-suffering producer and the butt of more of my jokes than anyone else these days. I want to say a big thank you to Judy Jafar, to Maxine, to Charlotte, to Olivia, and to everybody else who's involved, because without you guys it's a team effort. Okay, I sit here in the front and centre yammering on to you guys into a camera, but if it hadn't been for all the other people's work, none of it would get done. So a big thank you to you all. We'll be back next Saturday at 3 o'clock. At least I hope so. So until then, be seeing you.